And that's where we're keeping our focus this morning, the fight against terrorism and, of course, that global index report that just came through a couple of days back. And just to help us have a better understanding, grip of it, we've been joined on the set by retired Captain Aliyu Umar for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
You know, whenever you come on the show, a lot of people are just waiting to hear what you're going to say these days. That profile increasing almost every time. But you just heard about this global terrorism index, and scoring Nigeria is still third most terrorized country in the world. What does this tell us?
What it tells us is we are, mind you, scoring us third is consecutively 3 times now.
3 times. This is the fourth time. This is the fourth as well.
What it's telling you is that at the global level, all we've been able to do 3 years past to present hasn't been significant enough to move us. Okay? So there's a bracket. There's a bracket on the global terrorist index from very high to, medium, like that, up to not indicated. That is virtually not existent for countries like Botswana, where nothing at all is happening as for terrorism. Now, what it's saying is at the global level, at the global aggregate, within the bracket of very high, we haven't done enough to leave that bracket. So if I could put it in a way you understand it, for the layman out there, is I like to use football because I know it's the second religion in Nigeria. Everybody keys into that. You could put in so many goals in a particular match and still not have gathered enough points to make it to the next, is it stage now of the, I'm not too much into football. So what we're having...
Next round of play.
Yes, exactly. What we're having at the global level, comparatively, hasn't given us that much traction to leave the position we are in. And what that simply tells you is we are deficient in areas of what I want to call continuous improvement. Continuous improvement itself is something we tend to miss out on. Once we score 1 feat, we keep harping on that feat, and at a point in time the feat expires and we keep talking about it and we lose focus of what has to be done. So yes, we've scored some feats in the past. If you go to 2016 index, which discussed 2015, 2017 discussed 2016, you're going to see indicators that this was done, this was done, this was done, which brought us up to a certain stage. But still, as far as the global terrorist index is concerned, we are still highly afflicted.
But even though you say we're still highly afflicted based on these ratings, wouldn't it be good to also take into consideration the fact that, according to that report, the number of deaths also dropped significantly?
Yes, the number of deaths dropped significantly. But when you look at it from the perspective I am looking, you could be able to say, okay, you wrote an exam, and from 0 to 49, or is it 39 now, is fail. I don't know, I think it's 39 or 29.
39, of course.
Okay, fail. Just an example now. And the first time you wrote the exam, you scored 12. And then the next time you wrote the exam, you scored 28. You have actually improved, but you have still not passed, isn't it? So the number of deaths have dropped, yes. But the number it has dropped to is still significantly within the bracket of classifying it as high. Okay? Or put another way, if your blood pressure was very high, systolic and diastolic, and there is a bar which the doctors have set, or the United Nations World Health Organization has its bar for blood pressure, which is, I think, normal. and you are still, maybe you dropped like 10 notches, which is significant, but you are still very far from normal. We'll still say it's high, isn't it?
Okay.
So it's not about figures.
What would you say has kept the nation in that position of not going above the mark, as you say, the pass mark, so to speak? Because going by the report, they attributed it to the emergence of other groups.
Yes, you see, when you look at the Global Terrorist Index, you have to understand that other than being a global terrorist index, it's actually three things more, or two things more. First, it's an attempt by the Institute for Economic and Peace to focus on peace as a possible direction towards garnering the world's progress, especially economically. Then there is also another aspect which we must not lose sight of. It's what we call study of terrorism and responses to terrorism. That too is an organization or an institution, START. And they all came together and put this together. Now, what you look at when you see our situation here is, naturally in Nigeria, we have this challenge with maintenance. We have a very poor maintenance culture. We find it very difficult to sustain things. We've been able to get to a position, if you come home now, leave the global out of it, take Nigeria now, isolate Nigeria and look at the status. If we were to do a GTI, a National Terrorist Index in Nigeria, the result will not even be anywhere near, it will be worse. The reason why it's diluted is because we're looking at it from a global aggregate. Now, if you come back to Nigeria and you look at it, you discover that security itself is not just about terrorism. There could be goals we have scored in the fight against terrorism which have been diluted or eroded by acts of insecurity in other parts. So let's look at it this way. If we scored +4 on aggregate in the fight against terrorism, and that took our national security aggregate up +4, and somewhere in the North Central, we buried some 200 people in graves, and somewhere in Zamfara State, we are seeing bandits doing what they do, and somewhere else, we are seeing communities fighting and killing generals and burying them in shallow wells. That +4 is diluted at the national security level. National security is not isolated. It's a compendium of so many other security activities. So if that +4, we ended up registering -3, what do you think we end up with? +1?